Good morning. Today is May 5th. Welcome to Algebra 1. As usual, for your class rules, just be respectful. If you have to do your best. A few tips: if you are watching this video, make sure to have a paper and pencil for notes. And then make sure to attend office hours so that if you have any questions about this presentation, you can attend. As far as stress check goes in the comments, please go ahead and write from 0 to 10 how you're feeling. I would like to know, even if you didn't get a chance to come to session. So the objective today for Tuesday, May 5th, is that you will graph linear equations using slope-intercept form. So before we even get into that, I want to go ahead and review the do now that was due today. Question number 1 is a question you guys have seen in class before. So solving the inequality for n. So our very first step for this one is if we have this inequality, 25 is greater than n plus 12. Remember, our goal is always to get 12 by itself, so I would subtract by 12 on each side. And if you guys remember, I do the whole draw the river just so I can see separate the two sides. That leaves me with 13 is greater than n. Notice my inequality symbol did not flip, and that's because I did not multiply or divide by a negative number. Remember, whenever you multiply or divide by a negative number, that inequality sign flips. Otherwise, it stays the same. So now I go ahead and I look at which answer reflects the answer that I got, and that would be this one here. As a reminder, when you do your do now on Schoology, make sure that you're careful with what answer you select, because sometimes I do choose the shuffle option. So even if you think you know the answer based on this PowerPoint, I want you to make sure to look for the correct one. So let's look at question number 2, which graph has a y-intercept of 5. As a reminder, y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. This is a y-axis, the one that goes up and down, the one that's vertical. We want the line to cross at 5. So if we go 2, 4, and then there's 6, what's in between this is 5, so that might be it. We want it to cross here at 5. So out of all my options, which one crosses at 5 on the y-axis? My answer would be this one. So today the problem of the day is that the graph below shows the amount of money in dollars in Mary's bank account, modeled as a function of time. Determine whether each statement is true according to the graph. Select true or false for each statement. So we have a graph in front of us that has, on one axis it has time, the other side it has the amount in her bank account in dollars. And then we have prompts A, B, and C, and then we have to determine which of these statements is true and which are false. So this is something we'll come back to after our lesson. So looking at intercepts. So what's an intercept? An intercept is when a line crosses either the y-axis, the one that goes up or down, this is my y, or it's when my line crosses my x-axis, which is this line here. So notice this is called right here, this is called an x-intercept because that's where it crosses the x-axis. And this is the one that we really talk about, which is a y-intercept, which is where it crosses the y-axis. So the y-intercept is a point where the line crosses the y-axis, which is this right here. That's what we're focusing on for the slope. Slope-intercept form is y is equal to mx plus b. M is the slope, as we've mentioned before. B is the y-intercept. So when we have an equation that looks like this, y equals 2x plus 3, right away I should be able to identify my slope and my y-intercept. I know that my slope is 2, and I know that my y-intercept is 3 because of the position that they're placed in. So if we were to write 2 as a fraction, remember there's always an imaginary 1 below it. So that's why it says the slope is 2 over 1. And my y-intercept is 0, 3 because when we graph it, it is placed as 0, 3. So now we're going to graph using slope-intercept form. So we're going to graph this equation. Before we begin, we have to identify the slope and the y-intercept. For this equation, we know that the slope is 2, or 2 over 1 because of that imaginary 1 below it. So 2 or 2 over 1. And then we look at this value right here. And that's our y-intercept. So we know our y-intercept is going to be 4. So our y-intercept is 4, or if we were to graph it, it's called 0, 4. So 0, 4, that's the coordinate. So now that we have our first step, which is identify the slope and the y-intercept, we have our graph. The first step is that you plot the y-intercept on your graph. In this case, the y-intercept is 4, so I'm going to go ahead and plot that. So I look at the y-axis. Again, remember this is y, this is x. And I look for 4 because that is what my y-intercept. So I go from 0 here, the origin. I go up to 4. And that's where my y-intercept is. Now my next step is that I use, starting from y4, so starting here, I use my slope to plot my next point. So I know that my slope is 2 or 2 over 1, right? That imaginary 1 below it. So what I do from here is I go up 1, 2, and I go to the right one. So the 2 over 1. And that gives me my next point. Now my third step would be, if I have a pencil and a paper in front of me, my next steps would be to go ahead and create a line. Let me go ahead and erase what I have. There you go. It would be between those 2 points that I plotted, it would be to connect the lines. And then I connect those, and I don't just connect that little part, I just kind of make it go all the way through, extend it. And that's your line. So just so you guys know, every point, and this is something we covered before, every point on this line is a solution. So if it lands, if I say, I might say is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is 2, 8 a solution? I would put 2, 8 would be a solution because it lands on the line. Let's look at example 2. So graph the equation y is equal to negative 1/3. Again, we identify the slope and the y-intercept. In this case, the slope is negative 1/3, and that's because it is in front of that x. Our y-intercept is 0 because notice that usually where our blue number or our plus b would be, our intercept, there's nothing. So in other words, the y-intercept is 0. So now that I have my slope and y-intercept, I know that when I go ahead and graph, my y-intercept, which is what I graph first, is at 0. Notice it's already there for me. My second step would be to take my slope, and from 0, I go down 1 because of the negative 1, and to the right 3. So notice that's what they do here. They go from here, they go down 1 for the negative 1, and then to the right 3. And that makes a second point. And then using a ruler, I would go ahead and connect those dots to make my line. Again, every point on this line is a solution to the equation. So now let's go ahead and practice this. So again, our first step would be to go ahead and identify my slope, and I'm going to write my slope as m. That would be negative 2, but remember there's an imaginary number below it because there's no fraction, so it would be over 1. My y-intercept would be positive 2. We know that from here. So then I go ahead on my graph and I graph my y-intercept. My y-intercept is 2. So I look at so I go here. My slope is negative 2 over 1, so I go down 2 spaces to the right one. And then I go ahead and connect the dots. And just keep in mind that with this tool, it won't be straight at all, apparently. But this is why you would use a ruler if you're doing this at home. And that is the graph for the line. So now we do the same thing for question number 2. We identify our slope. Remember, slope is in this place right here. So that's 1 over 2. We identify our y-intercept. So we look at this, including the sign, it would be negative 2. So then I take my y-intercept and I look for negative 2. I take my slope and I go 1 over 2. So that means I go rise 1. So I go up 1 to the right 2. And then I connect those dots using a ruler. Notice I go beyond the dots, the points. So now looking at this question, the graph below shows the amount of money in dollars in Mary's bank account, modeled as a function of time. Determine whether each statement is true according to the graph. Select true or false for each statement. So looking at this question, so we're looking at, it says she will spend all her money after 50 days. So it shows me that on day 0, so when she first has, or when we first start seeing her bank account, it says that she has, I believe it's $5,000. And then it says, here it tells me how many days go by. So after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 days, notice she is at 0. Meaning, will she spend her money after 50 days? She will, so that is true. When we look at statement 2, the amount of money in the bank is at a minimum at 0 minutes, meaning minimum is at its lowest amount. So if we look at 0 minutes, which is, we look at where it says time/days, although that should say 0 days, or seeing as this is days. But let's say it says days, not minutes. If we're at 0, is it at a minimum on that day? No, because it's not at its lowest amount. If anything, is at its highest. So this would be false because it is not true. And last but not least, the maximum amount of money in the account was at 50 days. So we go to 50 days. Is that the maximum amount? Meaning after 50 days, did Mary have more money? No, she had less. It's at its minimum. So this one would also be false. And that is how we answer that word problem. All right, so if you do have any questions, this is where during session you would ask questions, but if you aren't in session, you would come to office hours, hopefully, and those are held on Wednesdays and Fridays from 2 to 3 p.m. So next step, so after class today, make sure to complete the do now for today if you haven't already. Make sure to complete the exit ticket after class. Again, that'll be available after class, having to do with this topic. And then if you haven't, make sure to complete the CFA 3A Seeing Structure and Expressions, which is on your Schoology. So it's if you go to the very bottom or near the bottom of your materials, it'll say CFA 3. Please make sure to click. And then there's a link that takes you to what you're supposed to fill out. Please make sure to complete that. And then before class next, on Thursday, also make sure to complete the do now for that class. Hopefully, if you do have any questions, I'll see you during office hours tomorrow from 2 to 3 p.m. And if not, I'll see you in class on Thursday.